It is a privilege to deliver again this year on behalf of the American people a message of friendship and respect to Muslims around the world as they begin the sacred month of Ramadan. As Americans' 6 million member Muslim community grows in numbers and prominence, Americans of every religious tradition are learning more about the origins and meaning of Islam. That on the night of power, the angel Gabriel appeared to the Prophet Muhammad and revealed to him the first verses of the Quran. That the Quran declares that Ramadan was the month Allah's words were sent down, and so should be spent in fasting. The rigors undertaken by devout Muslims inspire respect for Islam among people of all faiths, and this can bring hope of greater understanding for goodwill. It can overflow old boundaries when wholehearted devotion to one's own faith is matched with a devout respect for the faith of others. That is why we welcome Islam in America. It enriches our country with Islam's teachings of self-discipline, compassion, and commitment to family. It deepens America's respect for Muslims here at home and around the world, from Indonesia to Pakistan, the Middle East, and Africa. We all had hoped that when this month's crescent moon first appeared and the month of Ramadan was announced, fasting would begin in a time of peace. Yet tragically, violence continues and lives are being lost in the land that is holy to Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. For all Americans, these deaths are a source of great sorrow. The Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University, where I attended college, has told me of a verse in the Quran in which Allah tells us that He created nations and tribes so we may know one another, not so we might despise one another. As the fasting of Ramadan begins, I pray people of all faiths may come to appreciate this precious wisdom of the Quran. And when next month's moon appears and the Muslim world celebrates Eid al-Fitr, we may also celebrate the revival of our hopes for peace throughout the world. Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you all for coming. Please be seated. Ramadan Mubarak. Laura and I are pleased to have you here for our 7th iftar dinner. Tonight we celebrate traditions of Islamic faith, which brings hope and comfort to more than 1 billion people. For Muslims around the world, the holy month of Ramadan is a special time of prayer and fasting. It is a time for charity and service to those less fortunate. It's a time to celebrate Islam's learned and vibrant culture, which has enriched civilization for centuries. Ramadan is also a good time for Americans of all faiths to reflect on the values we hold in common, including love of family, gratitude to the Almighty, devotion to community, and a commitment to religious liberty.
By all our aspiration.
The freedom of worship is central to the American character. It's the first protection in the Bill of Rights. It holds together the fabric of American society, supporting every individual's right to practice his or her beliefs without fear. Today, our world is at war with violent extremists who seek to tear the fabric of our society and stop the advance of freedom in Muslim societies around the world. They attack holy sites, destroy mosques and minarets, and kill innocent men, women, and children, including Muslims who do not share their radical views. They believe that by spreading chaos and violence, they can frustrate the desire of Muslims to live in freedom and peace. We say to them, you don't represent Muslims, you do not represent Islam, and you will not succeed.
Welcome to the White House. Every year our iftar is a chance to join in fellowship with friends, old and new, and to celebrate the incredible diversity of our great nation. And I want to recognize members of our diplomatic corps who are here, and it's wonderful to have you back, as well as members of Congress who are joining us here tonight. We have leaders from my administration, and most importantly, we welcome Muslim Americans from across the country. So I want to thank you all for being here. Ramadan Kareem. It's late. You're hungry. I will be brief. Tonight we honor the traditions of one of the world's great faiths. For Muslims, Ramadan is a time to reflect and remember that discipline, devotion is the essence of a life of faith. And for all of us, whatever our faiths, Ramadan is a reminder of just how much we share. The values of peace and charity, the importance of family and community, these are universal values. The command to love one another, to uphold justice, and to care for the least among us. These are common threads in our faith traditions. Tonight we reaffirm a simple truth. Fundamental to the character of our country is our freedom of religion, the right to practice our faith as we choose, to change our faith if we choose, or to practice no faith at all, and to do all this free from fear of persecution. All of us are deserving of an equal opportunity to thrive, no matter who we are, what we look like, what we believe, or how we pray. And all of us have an obligation to do our part, to help others overcome barriers, to reverse the injustice of inequality, and to help more of our fellow citizens share in the promise of America. In Islam, there is a hadith that says God helps the servant as long as the servant helps his brother. In other words, we're summoned to serve and lift up one another. And that's the lesson of several of our guests here tonight. I'm just going to mention a couple. Kelly Carlisle served our country in the Navy, and more recently she founded Acta Non Verba, Deeds Not Words. And in a very tough part of Oakland, California, she started an urban farm where local children can grow and sell fresh food, which Michelle would appreciate very much. Then Kelly deposits 100% of the profits they earn into individual savings accounts for those children, because studies show that a child with a savings account is more likely to attend college. So thanks to Kelly, these boys and girls are not only learning the value of hard work at an early age, they're changing how they think about themselves and opening their minds to what's possible in their lives. So we want to thank Kelly for that great work. Growing up in Pakistan, Muhammad Chowdhury and his family, part of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, were mistreated because of their beliefs. They emigrated to America, and in California, Muhammad saw world-changing technologies being launched in the same neighborhoods where too many students struggled just to stay in school. Today, he runs a foundation that works with schools, parents, and local IT startups to better prepare students to embrace science and math. And they've started turning the tables, thanks to Muhammad's foundation. So many of these students are now taking classes that put them on track for college. So we want to thank Muhammad for being such a great example. And you can see the kind of impact Muhammad's work can have, how each generation can help bring along the next, in young people like Ala Muhammad. Ala's family immigrated to the United States from Sudan. Both her parents worked several jobs in order to send her to a good high school in Chicago, a great town. I added that, that's not in the remarks. But according to Ala, applying for college was a depressing time because she didn't know what opportunities were out there and she didn't know how her family would pay for her college. But with the help of a nonprofit that focuses on young people like her, she set her sights high. She earned admission to Yale, which I understand is quite good. She graduated with a double major. Today she works in finance, and now she's paying it forward by developing a curriculum to inspire Muslim high school students, especially girls, to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. So we want to thank Allah for that. So these three individuals are just an example of the wonderful work that is done. You've made it your mission, each in your own way, to help others overcome barriers and to push back on those forces of inequality and to help the next generation share in the American dream. These folks realize that sometimes all a young person needs is knowing that somebody cares about them and believes in them. I know I'm only here because a few people, my mother and my grandparents and dedicated teachers, took time to invest in me. And so we've got to do everything in our power as a nation and as individuals to make sure more Americans have the opportunity to move ahead and move up, whether it's good wages that reward hard work, good jobs that help provide for a career and a family, or the education that allows every child to realize his potential or her God-given potential. And that's my mission as president. I want to thank all of those here tonight who, in their respective communities, try to do the same thing. And finally, tonight reminds us of our responsibilities to each other beyond our borders, as well as within. Even as we celebrate all that we have in common, we know that in too many corners of the world we see violence and terror of those who would destroy rather than build. These are particularly difficult times in the Middle East. In Syria, the Assad regime continues its brutality against the Syrian people, and so we continue to help Syrians stand up to Assad and deal with the humanitarian crisis and push back against extremists. In Iraq, where ISIL's attacks on civilians and destruction of religious sites seek to inflame sectarian tensions, we continue to call for a new government that can unite Iraqis and show all communities in Iraq that they can advance their aspirations through the political process. Separately, the pictures we are seeing in Gaza and Israel are heart-wrenching. People here in the United States care deeply about what's happening there, and I know there's strong views as well as differences about how we should move forward, which is part of American democracy. We welcome that debate. That makes us stronger. Our goal has been and continues to be peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Now, I will say very clearly, no country can accept rockets fired indiscriminately at citizens. And so we've been very clear that Israel has the right to defend itself against what I consider to be inexcusable attacks from Hamas. At the same time, on top of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza that we've worked long and hard to alleviate, the death and injury of Palestinian civilians is a tragedy, which is why we've emphasized the need to protect civilians, regardless of who they are or where they live. I believe further escalation benefits no one, least of all the Israeli and the Palestinian people. So we're going to continue doing everything we can to facilitate a return to the 2012 ceasefire. We are encouraged that Egypt has made a proposal to accomplish this goal, which we hope can restore the calm that we've been seeking. More broadly, however, the situation in Gaza reminds us again that the status quo is unsustainable and that the only path to true security is a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians, where differences are resolved peacefully and in ways that respect the dignity of all people. Here at home, even as we're vigilant in ensuring our security, we have to continue to remain true to our highest ideals. In the United States of America, there's no place for false divisions between races and religions. We are all Americans, equal in rights and dignity, and no one should ever be targeted or disparaged because of their faith. And that, too, is what makes us stronger. So tonight, as we gather to celebrate Ramadan, let's renew our obligations to one another. Like Kelly and Muhammad and Allah, let's help lift up our neighbors so more people share in the American dream. Let's commit ourselves as nations and as individuals to pursue the peace we seek in our world. And let's remember, whatever our faith, we are servants of God, summoned to care for our brothers and sisters. So God bless you all. God bless America. And may you and your families have a blessed Ramadan. That went a little longer than I expected, but please get back to the soup, which I understand is quite good. Thank you.
Muslims furious after they realize who Trump isn't allowing in the White House for Ramadan. President Donald Trump just made a decision about Islam that has Muslims furious, and there's nothing any activist federal court judge can do about it. After years of previous presidents pandering to Muslims at the White House, American patriots all over the country are celebrating Trump's epic move. Wait until you see what he did during their most holy holiday. According to the Gateway pundit, Trump sent a clear message to Muslims by decisively ending the White House tradition of hosting the iftar dinner to celebrate the Islamic holiday, Ramadan. The ludicrous practice was started by impeached former Democrat president and cigar aficionado Bill Clinton. Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Hussein Obama continued to honor Ramadan with an official White House dinner during their administrations, much to the dismay of millions of Americans who treasure our Christian heritage. It just doesn't make sense to celebrate a religion that teaches death to Christians. Ramadan began on May 27, 2017, this year, and ended at sundown on Saturday, June 24, 2017. Muslims around the world celebrate the end of their holy month by celebrating the holiday Eid al-Fitr, the feast of breaking of the fast. Ending the traditions of Islam in America is long overdue. Trump's administration did not even respond to multiple requests from the outraged mainstream media for comment regarding the absent iftar dinner, according to the Washington Post. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson did, however, say the State Department would not be honoring the Muslim holiday as previous administrations have in the past by hosting a Ramadan reception. In addition, Tillerson sent out a brief statement saying, "Best wishes to all Muslims celebrating Eid al-Fitr." This holiday marks the culmination of Ramadan, a month in which many experience meaning and inspiration in acts of fasting, prayer, and charity, Tillerson said in the statement. This day offers an opportunity to reflect on our shared commitment to building peaceful and prosperous communities. Eid Mubarak, he added. Despite Tillerson's attempt to smooth things over with his well wishes for Muslims, the White House stayed the course and did not even acknowledge the Islamic holiday. These are fundamental common-sense decisions that Americans should expect from any president. This year, Ramadan has been an opportunity for many Muslims to celebrate the recent terrorist attacks in England, where an Islamic jihadist killed men, women, and children in cold blood. According to a report by Newsweek, many Muslims in the United States are furious with Trump's decision to snub the religion of peace and go golfing instead of honoring their holy day. It is disappointing because that's been a good tradition, Imam Talib Sharif of the nation's mosque in Washington, D.C., said in an interview with Newsweek Friday. To stop it doesn't send a good message. You get the chance to go golfing and all this other kind of stuff. How come you don't have time for a population of your society that needs some assistance? The message that it sends is that we're not that important. The idea that Muslims are the population within our society that needs assistance is tremendously stupid. According to a 2016 report by Investment Watch, 91.4% of Muslim refugees in America are on food stamps while 68.3% receive cash welfare. But, the Imam's declaration of need is exactly how Muslims carry out their subversion of Western countries. The majority of them immigrate with no intention of working or assimilation and then live like parasites while growing their own population at the expense of the host body they are trying to kill. Thank God, we finally have a president who isn't afraid to put an end to the idiotic political correctness of the past.
Hi, this is Tim from Moriel TV and Moriel Radio, here live from Bulgaria with James Jacob Prasch for This Week in Prophecy.
Blessings, dear friends, greetings in Jesus. It's the very end of June 2017. Let's review This Week in Prophecy, where we look at current events in the Middle East, Europe, America, and elsewhere, and relate them to what the Word of God says will transpire in the last days, as we await the return of Jesus and prepare the way for his glorious return. As always, we begin in Israel. 3 times this week in prophecy, 3 times this week, projectiles, rockets, shells have fallen on the Israeli side of the border on the Golan Heights 3 times. And all 3 times the Israelis responded with airstrikes. It's taken place 3 times. This time, however, it was near a place where many people have been, many tourists have seen, the overlook opposite Kunitra in the UN-controlled area where tourists go to have a look towards the area of where the conversion of St. Paul took place towards Damascus. And it's a tourist area, yet 3 times this area came under fire. I don't say that to discourage people from visiting Israel as tourists. Nobody was injured or anything of that nature, but it took place shockingly near Kenitra, and not far from where tourists would certainly hear it and possibly even see it. There are reports that the Israelis have been coordinating with some rebel groups because of the conundrum. On one hand, you have the ISIS forces who are radical Sunnis. They're opposed by the Russians, by Assad, and by Iran. So Israel has no friends But there is a third faction that is somehow aligned with the West, with which Israel does have some cooperation out of necessity. It's like what the former Yugoslavia was when the Bosnians and the Serbs were fighting each other. There were no good people. Among the Serbs who were Eastern Orthodox, among the Croats who were Catholics, and among the Bosnians who were Muslims, there was no good faction to back. It was only looking for who was the lesser of evils. Well, that is very much the situation taking place in northern Iraq and in Syria. As we see the judgment of God coming increasingly on the Muslim world. But let's look at this. In Iraq, Mosul is ending, but there is a fear that as ISIS is driven from Mosul, and this will be the end of ISIS as a functioning army, it will fraction or splinter into insurgency groups that will continue a war of terror or a war of attrition from cell groups, from terror cells. That is the fear now of Western military advisors. Quite a situation. It is a hopeless, hopeless mess. Something transpired this week. Former American Green Berets, U.S. Army Special Forces, whose mission was to train anti-Assad Syrian fighters who are also anti-ISIS, tell us something. They've been telling us that the people that the Americans have been arming and training are people who were groomed to pretend that they were not radical fundamentalists, not Salafists, not terrorists. But these former U.S. Special Forces people who've come to the public tell us that these people are quite radical in themselves. One group, Al-Zanki, took a boy from a hospital who had intravenous in his arm, and they beheaded him. Now, these are people who are supposedly aligned to the West. The Free Syrian Army is indistinguishable from Al-Qaeda, according to these ex-Green Berets. So again, Israel and America are both looking for a lesser of evils. Someone who is not aligned with Assad and someone who is not aligned with ISIS. They're stuck in a place where all they can hope for is some kind of a functional lesser of evils. The same is said by some people concerning certain independence-minded Kurdish forces who are armed by the West. Now, I've said before, the Kurds are the only people in Iraq that the West can trust at all. They're the only people that the West can trust at all. However, the claim is made that some of them are quite capable of doing some things that the West would consider to be war crimes. It is a hopeless, hopeless mess, despite my own sympathy for the Kurdish people who are the descendants of the ancient Medes. Well, what else was happening in the Middle East this week? Jared Kushner had a tentative meeting with the Palestinian Authority, and an immediate rift occurred, with his demand that the Palestinian Authority cease using international aid to fund terrorists and stop incitement and do not continue to salary via their families people in prison for terrorist crimes. They're taking international aid given by America, Europe, and others, and they're funding terrorists. They're paying the salary of terrorists while they're in prison. Also, Mr. Kushner denounced the Palestinian Authority because they refused to denounce the knifing of an Israeli military policewoman in Jerusalem that received a lot of press coverage. They failed to denounce this knifing of this policewoman. Hence, it got off to a very bad beginning. There is not a happy relationship already between Mr. Kushner, representing the Trump administration, and the Palestinian Authority. What the Palestinian Authority have been doing this past week is continuing to raise the stakes in Gaza. They are already causing a curtailing of electricity and electrical services and public utilities in Gaza. Again, because it is controlled by Hamas. But they are trying now in their new strategy to completely politically and legally delegitimize Hamas, even though Hamas will remain in control. They are doing this by proclaiming themselves to be the official government of Gaza. Therefore, it would close down the banking system in Gaza, completely close it down. What they're doing with public utilities, they're now attempting to do with banking. It is an assertion by the Palestinian Authority under Mr. Abbas to try to reacquire Gaza. Now, that will strategically not be possible. There were horrific wars and shootouts between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas when Hamas came to control in Gaza. Remember, the complaints about the Israelis and all these calls for boycott and disinvestment and this other nonsense is simply a diversion away from what the Muslims are doing to each other in Gaza. The horrific war crimes of almost genocidal proportions. The suffering being inflicted upon the people in Gaza by the Palestinian Authority itself because of their power struggle against Hamas. Again, like Syria, there are no good guys. The Lord has sent a spirit of confusion among them. They are divided against themselves. As we read in the book of Genesis, Esau's sword will be against his brother, and Ishmael's seed will always be divided. There is no ummah, there is no unity among the Arab people because of Islam. Islam prevents any kind of unity. The doctrine of ummah taught in the Quran does not work, and for the most part, it has never worked. It's certainly not working now. It is an indictment of Islam and its failures to bring the unity and peace among Muslims that Islam promises. We see this in the conflict between Assad and ISIS. We see it in the conflict in Iraq with ISIS. We see it in the conflict in Gaza with the Palestinians against other Palestinians. Hamas versus the Palestinian Authority. It is what the Word of God said will happen. Ishmael's seed will be divided. Esau's sword will be against his brother. They need a common enemy. It is the usual cry. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. In Gaza, that's the war cry. First we'll kill the Jews, then we'll kill the Christians. Why? Because unless they have Jews and Christians to kill, they will kill each other. And they are killing each other. The book of Genesis proves true, and the Quran, once again, proves false. There is no ummah. The rift with Mr. Kirshner is simply a reflection of what the Palestinian Authority truly is. It is about power, it is about control of financial resources, but it is not about liberation or anything of that nature. Their professed aspirations of national recognition are buried under a power play within their own ranks. But they have no sense. This is because of what it says in the book of Genesis. Not until the Arab people renounce Islam and false Christianity and come to Jesus will they be reconciled with each other. But when that day happens, they will also be reconciled with their other brothers, the Jews. That's this week in prophecy. Let us continue with some more news, this of a happier note, coming from Washington. Unlike Mr. Obama, Mr. Clinton, or Mr. Bush, to his credit, President Trump did not celebrate Ramadan in the White House. He did not celebrate the Islamic feast of Iftar or Eid at the White House as the Bush family did. The Bush family were famous for genuflecting to the Saudi Arabians and basically licking the boots of the House of Saud, pandering to the Saudians who funded extreme Islam, who funded Salafist radicalism, who operate a oppressive regime that horrifically persecutes Christians. Yet the Bush family was never prevented by any of the human rights abuses, the persecution of Christians, or the support of radicalism that helped engender September 11th. None of that ever prevented the Bush family from bowing down to the House of Saud and celebrating this feast of the pagan idol Allah in the White House. Predictably, the Clintons and, of course, Barack Obama were much the same. I am pleased to report that President Trump and Vice President Pence did not do that. We are under a period of respite. Something else happened in Israel this week and in Washington, commonly. The Prime Minister of India visited both countries. His visit was quite interesting. It had strategic ramifications for both the United States and for Israel, and does so for good reasons. Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister of India, negotiated an arms deal in Washington where he will obtain drones. Now, what is the importance of India to America and to Israel? Well, it takes place on two essential levels. India is poised to become the next China. China is heading for an economic catastrophe because of its banking crisis. Its shadow banking system is at some point going to collapse like a house of cards. The wealthy Chinese know this, and they've gotten much of their money out of China already, investing in real estate, investing in securities, and just putting the money into capital funds in America, Great Britain, and Switzerland. This has driven up real estate prices even in central London because of wealthy Chinese businessmen wanting to get their assets out of China as much as possible. They know what is coming. The internal debt crisis in China is greater than that of the United States. It is at least, the debt in China is at least 165 to 168%. Japan, by the way, has a public debt of 200% of GDP. The United States is just about 100% since Barack Obama. These figures are not good for anyone, but China's situation is desperate. It is this that in part pushed Japan over the edge and caused Japan to become the second-level player in Asia. Japan, formerly the world's second biggest economy, was displaced by China. Now China is heading the same way. It is heading for a crisis. Hence the rise of India, 1.3 billion people. Unlike China, India is at least to a degree a democratic country. India has more scientists and engineers per capita than any other country. It also has the biggest film industry after Hollywood, and it has a huge diaspora in both Great Britain and the United States. Important contributions in high-tech and in high-tech talent in mathematics, computer science, and engineering. Bangalore, India is the Silicon Valley of Asia, not China. India is promising. India has the largest middle class in the world, over 300 million people. There are as many middle-class people in India as there are people in the United States. It is a huge market and will soon overtake China demographically as the most populous country in the world. Now, India has serious problems internally and externally. Its internal problem is fundamentalism. With the Akali Dal, with the Sikhs, with the BNP, the Hindu Nationalist Party, but also with radical Islam most seriously, remembering the Islamic terrorist attacks in Mumbai. Its external problem is Pakistan, with whom it has had 5 wars since the two countries separated at the end of the Second World War. India formerly being composed of Pakistan and India under the British. Now Islamic Pakistan, which persecutes Christians and which has nuclear weapons, became a threat to India. Thus, India developed nuclear weapons in response. At some point, there will likely be another conflict between Pakistan and India over the Punjab. India is leaning towards the Israelis and towards the West, especially the United States, for backers, for partners, for unofficial allies. Thus, there is a strategic cooperation between the United States and India and between Israel and India increasingly. But also, again, Bangalore is the Silicon Valley of Asia. The Silicon Valley of the Middle East is North Tel Aviv, Herzliya, Israel, and its high-tech belt. Many of those upstart companies are owned by American conglomerates, begun by Israeli entrepreneurs and sold to American companies. Many American high-tech companies do and have done research and development in Israel. Israel's scientists and engineers, again, the best in the Middle East, coming out of the Technion in Haifa, the MIT of the Middle East. So you have this cooperation in the area of high-tech between Silicon Valley, North Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and Bangalore, and a strategic cooperation, all of them concerned with the nuclear armament of Muslim countries. For India, it is neighboring Pakistan, where that scientist, Khan, helped Pakistan develop a nuclear weapon on the days of Benazir Bhutto's father, Ali Bhutto. This is very interesting. It shows how strategic relationships and alliances are now beginning to extend beyond Israel's own borders into other corners of the earth, looking for friends. This is not the first time that happened. Before the end of apartheid, Israel had such secret cooperation under the Botha government in South Africa, and also with Taiwan. But now it is being revitalized again with India. There will be joint technology development programs with India and the United States that will have strategic application. That is what is going on. That is not simply why Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister of India, visited America, and it's not why he visited Israel, but it's why he visited both of them in the same week. We are seeing something happening here. Something else very interesting that the mainstream media is underplaying. We have spoken before of the Berber people of North Africa. The Berber people are Indo-European. They were a sub-Germanic people who lived in North Africa, and their ancestors were Christians. Their forebears were brutally persecuted for their Christian faith in the days of the Roman Empire. Then they were invaded by the Muslims, Arabs, after the time of Muhammad. What the Arab invaders did was killed the parents and took the children, forcing the children to become Muslim and forcing Islam on the Berber population. Countries such as Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, these countries, and Libya were not originally Arab countries. They were Berber countries. There was one autonomous region of northern Algeria on the coast with a high concentration of Berbers that the French in the period of French colonialism merged together with the rest of Algeria to colonize it, and it stayed Algerian after the French left in the 1960s, in the Night of the Jackal with Charles de Gaulle. But now something's happened. It has become a functionally autonomous coastal strip in northern Algeria. Well, the majority of the people are nominal Muslims, a significant number are Christian, and a growing number are evangelical Christian, reverting back to the ancient faith of their forebears, which were Bible-believing Christians. This goes back to the time of the Novatian Schism in the early church and the time of Augustine. We're talking now the 4th century. A rediscovery of Berber identity, language, culture, but also faith, which was Christian. Now, what these people, called the Qaid people, they are the Berbers of Algeria, what they have determined and said this week in prophecy is not only do they want to become some kind of an independent nation, but they want a strategic and military alliance with Israel. Well, that's quite a thing. We have found this before with the Phalangists in Lebanon. They were Christians who made a kind of alliance with Israel, and also with some of the Christian militias in southern Sudan. But now we have it happening in Algeria. Quite an interesting thing indeed. the growth of evangelicism among these Algerian Berbers, their desire for independence, not just autonomy, and their desire to reach an accord with Israel. So we have the growth of Algerian Berbers again, in a geographical region that's their ancient homeland, seeking not only autonomy but eventual independence, and rediscovering their language, their culture, and their faith, which is Christian. We have the simultaneous growth of evangelicism and a desire for them to align themselves with Israel in the face of the Islamic threat that has deposed them from their land for centuries. The real occupation is the occupation of North Africa by the Arab Muslims. The Berbers are the indigenous people. The real occupation is the occupation of Kurdistan by the Turks, because they're the indigenous people. The Jews are the indigenous people of Israel. There is no occupation of Palestine because Palestine has never existed. Something is happening again in the Middle East. We see it with the Kurds, who are the descendants of the Medes. Now we're seeing it with the Berbers, and we are seeing it, of course, with the southern Sudanese. All of them wanting friendship and alignment to some degree with Israel. The Kurds are quite open to it, and there has been secret military cooperation between Israel and the Kurds for some time. Although Israel was always anxious not to offend the Turks, that may change if Turkey continues under Erdogan to foster his Islamist agenda. Let us continue. Amazon Books did something rather horrific this week. There was a major selling book from the New York Times bestseller list, and it was a book that was 120 pages that was entitled A History of the Palestinian People by Asaf Aval, an Israeli writer. And the book was selling quite well. It was just 120 blank pages. But Amazon agreed to remove it. Jeff Bezos is left-wing leaning, and he's extremely wealthy, almost as wealthy as Bill Gates, in a class with Bill Gates and with Warren Buffett. But his political leanings are not particularly friendly towards Israel, although they are not overtly anti either. The book was removed by Amazon. We're seeing more and more of this kind of pressure. Let's move on now. Let's move to Great Britain. Something is happening in Great Britain that has been affecting Christian schools, and it is now affecting Jewish schools. What is that?
Good evening and welcome to the programme with me, Riz Latif. We start tonight with a special report on illegal Orthodox Jewish schools where it's estimated up to 1,000 boys have disappeared from mainstream education. BBC London has discovered 12 so-called yeshivas operating in the capital. They're unregistered, unmonitored and unregulated. They teach boys strict religious studies for up to 15 hours per day behind closed doors. 2 former pupils have told us that they were deprived of a proper education. Now there's a growing call for them to be shut down. Here's our education reporter, Mark Ashdown.
A nondescript house in Stamford Hill, North London, with a window into a secret world. It's well into the evening. Most children are at home in bed, but here hundreds of Orthodox Jewish boys are still at school.
If it's a yeshiva, 150 boys, everybody's in one big room, learning.
This Jewish teenager, who's now left and asked us to hide his face and voice, describes what it's like.
Basically, the whole day you're locked up, from about 7 a.m. to 9:10 in the evening.
He studied at a yeshiva from age 11 to 16. So did his friend, who's also now left and also wants anonymity.
You grow up pretty much speaking Yiddish most of your life, both at home and at school. You grow up with, without very basic skills, basic English, basic maths.
This is a yeshiva in Jerusalem. All the boys study is the 22 books of the Talmud. All day long, nothing else. In North London, it's now estimated 1,000 boys have disappeared into a dozen unregulated schools which are doing the same. They leave with no grasp of English, maths, let alone the national curriculum. So we've been given this list of 12 schools which operate in this area, so we're going to go and try and find them. They're hidden, but not hard to find if you look. There are boys at windows, occasionally out front. Past 9 o'clock, and a group of boys are walked into one of the addresses. We did contact all of them and hand-delivered a letter asking if they'd be interviewed, but none got back to us.
For many boys, once you're 13, you're only allowed out at mornings and at night, and usually when it's dark, so you don't get exposed.
The whole system works like a trap. They just trap you from when you're born until when you die. Every single step in your life is just a trap.
Orthodox Jewish girls are educated in more mainstream schools like Yesodei HaTorah, though they've been criticised over restrictions on admissions, uniform and redacting some exam questions. Any establishment educating children for 20 hours a week or more should be registered as a school and regulated. Those who don't are breaking the law and could face prosecution. Some feel with a clampdown underway on Muslim and Christian faith schools, which fail to teach a broad curriculum or British values, action here is long overdue.
They do know about it, and they've known about it for a very long time, and this is what's such a scandal, is that they haven't done anything despite knowing that these schools exist and that these children are being subjected to an incredibly limited education.
Yeshivas cause concern in the wider Jewish community too. Rabbi Jonathan Romain is chair of the UK Rabbinic Court and says it's time to stop turning a blind eye to what he calls an open secret.
It's something that the Department of Education really needs to pull them up on very sharply, not just because it's illegal, but it's also doing a double disservice. Firstly, to the children themselves, it's denying them the basic skills of English and maths and science, really preventing them from having sort of working opportunities later on. And secondly, it means that whole community is sort of cut off from the national conversation. They can't take part in national life and integrate at all.
Outside world is evil. You're not allowed to be friends with them. You're not allowed to speak their language. You're not allowed to talk to them. It's like they brain damage you into your head that it's not that every non-Jew is going to kill you. It's just, we are different. We are Jewish.
It is to all intents and purposes a form of child neglect or child abuse. The state has a responsibility to ensure that every child does get that minimum level of education to function in the outside world.
A source close to the Education Secretary told us yeshivas are on their radar. The consultation launched on Friday will look to strengthen the government's powers to make sure all schools teach a broad curriculum. Hackney Council says it works with the Jewish community to identify unregistered schools. Ofsted says it won't hesitate to make inspection visits when necessary. We spoke to more boys who didn't want to even do an interview. There is now a support group for those trying to get educated and integrated into wider society. They say they're supporting dozens of boys. The numbers grow every week.
I'm not educated. I don't have knowledge. I'm a lost bird, you know? Like, basically, I lost 20 years. Somebody killed me for 20 years and reborned me with an older figure.
A shocking end there. People will be watching, wondering, how can this happen?
Well, especially considering there are other schools, Muslim schools, for example, which are raided and closed down, and these apparently are allowed to just carry on. I think there are a number of reasons why. Firstly, this is a very secretive, segregated community. They're very underground, if you like, and I think there's a fear of driving them further away. Secondly, parents pay fees to send their children there. That's complicated. And thirdly, in a sense, they're harmless in that there are priorities elsewhere where children are being perhaps radicalised. That sort of thing doesn't happen here. Even so, there's no doubt these boys are being let down. They deserve a full education. That's their basic right, and they're being deprived of that.
Do you get any sense that the government will look at sorting this out?
Well, I think so. I think they are, but they're not just going to wade in and start closing them down. I think that's what this consultation's aimed at, which they launched on Friday. It's a trawl for information. They want parents to come forward with concerns. They think there's an unregistered school of any type in their area. Then they can push to strengthen their powers, engage with them, encourage them to change, if not, force them. There has been a bit of buck passing until now. Who knew what, who has or hasn't acted, but it's clear they need to take this seriously now. In New York, just last week, this came to a head. A group of parents and former students are suing for yeshivas, the state and the local school district for not providing a broad education. I think everyone here will be watching that unfold closely.
OK, Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark Ashdown.
Specifically, the British government, going back to the time of Tony Blair and his wife, who was a horrific woman, declared legally, by law, with the backing of the Labour government parliament, that homosexuality and sexual orientation of lesbians and homosexuals is mandatory in the school curriculum. Who inspect private and religious schools have 3 times failed the Vizhnitz girls' school, what's known as a Haredi religious Jewish school in London, for refusing to teach it in violation of their religious convictions based on the Torah. The school could be forced to, these religious Jewish schools are going to be forced to close down unless there is some amendment to the law. Now again, this was initially legislation that was pushed through by Tony Blair, aimed at Christians, aimed at Jews, aimed at anyone. But it's conspicuous that it's not being enforced against any Muslim schools that also oppose the teaching of homosexuality and lesbianism. They've only thus far begun to harass Christians and now Orthodox Jews. This, of course, will eventually result in either an increase in homeschooling among Orthodox Jews or further immigration to Israel by British Orthodox Jews, simply because they're being denied freedom of religion in Great Britain, whose government is pandering to the homosexual agenda. It is my hope that now that the Democratic Unionist Party is in coalition with the British government, the godless government, or the godless Prime Minister's office of Theresa May, will be forced to relent on these issues and the law will be amended. Part of the problem is the leader of the Conservative Party in Scotland is a lesbian, and she pushes the same agenda. So the British government has to pacify the pro-Christian, pro-Jewish, anti-same-sex marriage, pro-life coalition partners of Northern Ireland, but also a lesbian Conservative Party leader from Scotland. Theresa May is caught in this quagmire. But caught in the vice is now the Vizhnitz Haredi religious girls' school in Israel. The British government is dictating what religious schools can teach, that you must teach things concerning sexuality and homosexuality and lesbianism to your children that violate your religious moral convictions. And again, it's Christians and Jews who are being targeted.
The prince pushed away his breakfast.
Story time in a North London primary school, but this fairy tale has a gay twist.
The 2 princes are known as King and King. The wedding was very special, and everyone lives happily ever after.
It's hard to imagine, but just 5 years ago, teachers were forbidden from even using the word gay in classrooms.
But now, in some schools, pupils as young as 4 can choose from dozens of titles that portray being gay as anything but a problem. And it's not just books.
Sir?
As part of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Trans History Month, some pupils from a secondary school are performing Romeo and Julian.
But thou love me, let them find me here, for my life were better ended by their hate than death probed wanting of thy love.
But many people believe that schools are the wrong place to deal with gay issues.
I think, you know, the less of it, the better, particularly among young children, because I suppose what they want to do is teach children to respect homosexuals. Well, I think they've got their priorities wrong.
Vanda believes targeting school children with gay-themed books is important, and the younger, the better.
We're currently working on producing a teacher's pack for nursery, foundation, Key Stage 1, a CD of songs, 2 posters. It's not that we want to flood nurseries and schools with books about gay families, but if you're not represented, then you get a message that there's something wrong.
And schools may soon have no choice but to teach gay matters because of the Single Equality Bill, due to be passed later this year.
At the moment, there are very few schools in the capital who are brave enough to deal with homophobia. Perhaps that's because there are those that argue that the classroom just isn't the right place.
David Akinsanya, BBC London News.
But what do you expect from the governments of people like David Cameron, Theresa May, Tony Blair, etc.? Let's continue looking at this particular issue. The conflict between Orthodox Jews and government is not just in Great Britain. It is now also in Israel. Major events this week. The coalition politics of Britain has a counterpart in the coalition politics of Israel, where Bibi Netanyahu and his faction of the Likud require partnership with certain religious parties to maintain power. There was a move to make a certain section of the Kotel, the Wailing Wall, open for men and women to pray together, or families to pray together, instead of the divide between men and women that ultra-Orthodox Jews require.
Only yesterday we saw Sharansky's plan to have an equal place in the Kotel for prayer, and the next thing we see this morning is arrests. I think this implies more than anything on the real intentions of the Israeli government, unfortunately. And the real intentions we can see is not to have an equal prayer and a pluralist place for women and men to prayer in the Kotel, in the wall.
This state should treat all Jewish streams in an egalitarian and equal way and respect human rights of all of its citizens. This is not what we saw today, unfortunately. And if the government will continue through the police with this behavior, there will be no foundation for a dialogue and a compromise in this holy site.
Once a month, a group of women of all denominations assemble together at the Western Wall, HaKotel HaMa'aravi, one of the holiest places in the world for the Jewish people, to hold a unique prayer service. We are Women of the Wall. We convened for the first time in December of 1988 at the conclusion of the Conference on the Empowerment of Jewish Women. Since then, we have been praying at the Kotel every month on Rosh Chodesh, with the exception of Rosh Chodesh Tishrei and Shabbat.
I'm very proud of the fact that it's a pluralistic group, I think that includes conservative, reform, reconstructionist, Orthodox.
Our sole aim is to let the women of the Jewish world be part of the religious practice as they see fit at the holiest site for the Jewish people, the Western Wall, HaKotel HaMa'aravi.
Our mission is to achieve social, legal, and religious equality at the Western Wall.
The Western Wall is the only remaining wall left of the Second Temple and is Judaism's most sacred holy site and the principal symbol of Jewish peoplehood and Jewish sovereignty. After the Six-Day War of 1967, for the first time since the destruction of the Temple, Jews had free access and freedom of practice at the Western Wall. Over time, many new customs, religious and non-religious, have been introduced at the wall. Bar mitzvah celebrations, the opening ceremony of Yom HaZikaron, Israeli fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism Remembrance Day, solemn swearing-in ceremonies for elite units of the Israel Defense Forces, and others. The Kotel is largely regarded as an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. The authorities constructed a permanent metal partition to separate the space in front of the Kotel into two sections, one for men and one for women. Rules for prayer and conduct at the holy site were created and applied under the jurisdiction of the Minister of Religious Affairs. The men's section of the Western Wall which was larger than the women's section to begin with, has continued to expand over the years at the expense of the women's side. Currently, the men's section takes up 3/4 of the space available. Both sections have prayer books, but only the men's section has Torah scrolls for public use. Not all the public, though, only the men. Out of hundreds of Torah scrolls dedicated to the Kotel by worshipers, none have been allocated for the use of women. In this new Kotel, rebranded by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, women are not allowed to pray out loud, adorn a talit, or read from the Torah, and girls from the young age of 6 are given a shmata, a piece of cloth, to cover any bare part of their body.
All day, gavul, men on one side, women on the other. They even have such a gavul at a wedding, where the men dance on one side and the women dance on the other side. Well, that's what takes place in the Wailing Wall Kotel, because you have the court of the women in the temple, and it's based on that model or concept. In some synagogues, the women are upstairs in a balcony, the men are downstairs, but you always have this separation. Well, there was a move by secular Jews, by liberal Jews, Reform Jews, even conservative and moderately Orthodox Jews, to have an area where anybody could pray with whomever they wanted. You'd still have an area only for men, only for women, but a mixed area. The Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox political parties objected. Mr. Netanyahu was forced to cave in and side with them in the cabinet vote in order to keep his coalition together. This has resulted in a conflict not only in Israel, but a conflict with the Saknut, the Jewish agency. For instance, me, myself, no Orthodox Jew would call me a Jew or consider me to be a Jewish. But the Saknut, the Jewish agency, gave me a Teuda Ole, an Israeli immigration certificate that says I am Jewish. They have a much broader and more liberal perspective of things like Jewish identity, and they're much more tolerant of different religious views. Some members of U.S. Congress who are pro-Israel have begun to protest in favor of the liberal Jews, as has major American Jewish leaders. So now you have an increased alienation between American Jewish supporters of Israel and the demands of the Orthodox inside Israel. I've warned about this before. I understand Mr. Netanyahu's political predicament. He's in a coalition government. As I've said many times, proportional representation is the least democratic form of democracy. And in some ways, I would hardly even call it a democracy. Are able to negotiate a few seats or a few votes for a disproportionate amount of power and influence. The religious have held the rest of Israel hostage by this means since the foundation of the state, when the late Ben-Gurion made the mistake of making a coalition with the National Religious Party, where only Orthodox Jews were tolerated, or only Orthodox Judaism. It's ridiculous that you even have ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects who are anti-Zionist, yet their rabbis can be salaried, the yeshivas can be subsidized, their synagogues can be subsidized, but a pro-Zionist Reform synagogue can receive nothing. A liberal or Reformed rabbi cannot even legally perform a wedding. Neither can a conservative rabbi. This is because the ultra-Orthodox hold the government and the society hostage. And Mr. Netanyahu is caught up in these political realities. It is a disgrace and a shame that the cowardly yeshiva boys from the Orthodox community will often not serve in the army. They will not even serve in the religious branch of the army, the Hesdari Yeshiva. They're exempt when everyone else has to fight. They hide on back of Jews braver than themselves. Everyone else's sons must go. If you're an Israeli university student and the army needs you for reserve duty, your studies are interrupted. These yeshiva boys sit in the yeshiva and get paid for it. Their studies are never interrupted. Secular Israelis are getting fed up with this hypocrisy, this cowardice, and this political blackmail. Things are beginning to come to a head, and they're coming to a head at the Wailing Wall. but now it has involved diasporic Jews. It has involved the American Jewish community who are getting the message. It puts Mr. Netanyahu in a very dangerous and precarious position politically. I do not think he personally agrees with the ultra-Orthodox, but politically he has no choice but to pander to them. Watch this situation. It is not only the situation of the disputes at the Kotel, but it is representative of the wider problem that is going to increase in the future. Let's go even further with this. A Jewish lady in Paris, Sarah Halimi, was thrown out of the window and killed by Muslim neighbors.
Apartment in Paris. Now, as you might have suspected, there's probably more to the story than just a woman being thrown out of her apartment. And there's quite a bit more to the story. Number one is she was literally thrown out of her apartment. She wasn't evicted. She was thrown out of a third-story window, and she died upon impact. Number two, as we already mentioned, she's 66 years old. Number three, she is Jewish, or she was. And number four, the individual who is suspected of chucking her out the window is a 27-year-old Muslim. And number five, reports say that he shouted, Allahu Akbar, which means something like, God is the greatest, my God's better than your God, or something like that, as he threw her to her death. And where are we? I think we're number 6, is before he threw her out the window, he stabbed her. Okay, so you have a 66-year-old Jewish woman who is stabbed and literally thrown at the third-story window of her apartment to her death by a 27-year-old Muslim who should not be in France. This happened in Paris, France. Why are we letting these people in our country? Anybody have any logical, rational idea? Okay, ostensibly, they are enduring severe violence in wherever they come from, and they come from all over the place. They come from Syria, they come from Pakistan, they come from Iran, they come from Iraq, they come from Yemen, they come from sub-Saharan Africa, they come from all over. It's not like there's trouble in Syria, so people from Pakistan have to flee to Europe. It's like they're Muslims and somebody wants to destroy Western Europe, so they're using violence in Middle East countries as a pretext to open the borders. Now, keep in mind, and I say this continually just to drive the thought home, this has been going on for 1,400 years, maybe longer. So why just now are they suddenly concerned about letting these people flee the violence in their country? Countries, plural. But let's also consider they're not fleeing the violence. They're bringing the violence with them. You see, the people are violent. It's not the dirt or the ground or the geography that's violent. It's the people who are violent. And when you import the people, you bring the violence with them. Okay, now if you were to go over to the Middle East, say Syria, or Pakistan or Yemen or wherever, and dig up some dirt and bring the dirt into Western Europe and say, look, we imported some of the Middle East. Okay, that would not be violent because the dirt is not violent. There's nothing about the geography or the terrain that is violent. It's the people who are causing the violence. So when you bring the violent people into Western Europe, they don't escape the violence because they are the violence. As is seen in the case of this 66-year-old woman who was chucked out her window in Paris to her death by a guy who allegedly by a guy who is 27 years old. Very quickly, this is from IsraeliNationalNews.com, and it says they tried to cover up the terror attack. Jewish woman in Paris attacked by a Muslim terrorist and thrown from the third story to her death. The murderer shouted, Allahu Akbar, which means, my God is better than your God, or something akin to that. Paris police are checking suspicions that a 27-year-old Muslim murdered his Jewish neighbor, identified as Sarah Lucy Halimi, following a confrontation in her apartment. According to a report, 66-year-old Halimi was attacked by the terrorist as she slept in her bed. He stabbed her and pushed her from her third-story apartment to her death while shouting again, Allahu Akbar. And if you ask any liberal, they will tell you, oh, come on. Diversity is our strength. Okay, let's see. You've got the nation of Israel surrounded by Muslim countries. They've been fighting as long as there have been people in that part of the country. At least for 1,400 years, but probably going back thousands of years as long. Well, according to the Bible, all the way back to the Abrahamic era, these people have been fighting. Now, if you bring these people to Paris and you put them in the same apartment building side by side, you got a 66-year-old Jewish woman who my guess is probably hasn't stabbed anybody or chucked anybody from the windows recently. And you put her next door to a Muslim. Basically what you have is you've got a little microcosm of what you have in the Middle East, only it's in Paris. How hard is that to understand? I grasp it perfectly. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it on social media. Lower right-hand corner, subscribe, click on the button, and we've got enough problems of our own without importing it. I mean, we're bad enough as it is. We don't need to bring in these Muslim thugs who are even worse.
Hate crimes are increasing in France against Jews. As we've stated before, this has pushed an increase in French Jewish immigration into Israel. You hear more and more people speaking French on the streets in certain French speaking neighborhoods, even in cities with French Jewish immigrant population. Naharia being one of them. She was actually thrown out the window. This is underreported by the French press and understated and underemphasized by the French government. Again, they are continuing to placate Islam. If a Muslim woman was thrown out the window and killed, you can bet there would be riots and demonstrations. It would be headline news in the mall. But it is not. It is the usual dual standard. The story continues. The area that France once held in the Middle East was Syria and Lebanon. When the French Empire collapsed and Lebanon divided from Syria, the idea was that Lebanon would be primarily the Christian area, while Syria the Muslim area. But the Muslims increasingly took over Syria, various areas of it. Although there are Druze and Christian enclaves, it was taken over largely by Muslims, much of them backed by Syria. Now it is Syria aligned, of course, with Iran. And Iranian flags are being planted on the Israeli border between Israel and Lebanon. A conflict on the Golan Heights with Iran and a conflict by proxy with the surrogates of Iran, Hezbollah, in southern Lebanon would not be difficult to imagine. The conflict with Iran will not simply be with Iran itself, but with its surrogates and with Republican guards and other Iranian volunteers dispatched both to Lebanon and to Syria. These Iranian flags are visible from the Israeli side of the border. They're representative of something. They're emblematic of what the book of Daniel says would transpire in Daniel chapter 10. The story continues. Israel has been one of the very few countries in the democratic world, maybe the only one, to criminally convict and imprison one of its prime ministers. As we speak, Ehud Olmert, former prime minister, imprisoned for bribery, fraud, and corruption, is going to be paroled early. His criminal sentence is being cut by a third. Even now, state prosecutors are objecting because there is further evidence of other crimes, such as leaking secure documents. Nonetheless, his sentence is being reduced. It is quite noticeable, however, that among the world's democracies, the only one that has ever brought a corrupt leader to justice is Israel. Certainly Barack Obama should have been impeached and he should have been put on trial, possibly for treason, for his sellout of America to Iran. Barack Obama ran a corrupt administration. Richard Nixon ran a corrupt administration. He was a criminal. But again, by constitutional and legal means, these men are not brought to justice. They can only be impeached and removed at most, and Obama was not impeached as he should have been. Israel, however, did criminally convict a prime minister. Let's continue. Fake news. Israel has often been the victim of fake news, but now fake news has become a global phenomenon. It has certainly become a phenomenon in the United States. While Israel is disputing with Michael Siegel, the leader of the Saknut, and other diasporic religious leaders, these reports in Israel were even overclouded by fake news reports of events said to be transpiring in Israel that simply were not true. That simply were not true, including those of human rights violations against Palestinians. One report was that 3 shot dead following knife attack. It doesn't tell you that the 3 who were shot dead were actually the Palestinians with the knives. The report portrayed them as the victim. In another instance, a Palestinian gunman in Hebron shot and killed an Israeli and was shot and killed himself in an Israeli military raid on a terrorist arms cache. But the media had a field day in the way they perverted those events. Well, let's move to the United States. There has been one attack after another on the Trump administration by the left-wing and mainstream media. None of it sticking. They went after Mr. Trump for things that are absolutely ridiculous. The big lie, however, was collusion with Russia. Now, CNN has admitted it was all false. It was only there because it was selling. It had no substance. What Mr. Comey said, what Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat, said, what Mr. Clapper, James Clapper, another Democrat, National Intelligence Director under Obama, said, and what John Brennan said, Obama's director of the CIA, all of them said there was no evidence of any collusion with Russia. Nonetheless, fake news continued to invent and push it. Innuendo, stories, rumors, misrepresented as facts. There was up to 20 times more coverage in CNN and MSNBC on the fake news of collusion with Russia than there was on the collapse of Obamacare, than there was on terror, 10 times more coverage concerning something that never transpired with Russia. Well, we're beginning to see it exposed now. We're beginning to see it admitted. The fall of the mainstream media. They have declining viewership, declining circulation, and declining readership, and they have declining credibility. Let them drop dead. In the age of the media, young people are not even watching network news anymore. As we've said, Fox was the end of the mainstream media, and now Fox is in decline. It is something from an age gone by. It is fast becoming a dinosaur, both obsolete and catalyzing its death by its suicidal malconduct. Fake news. Fake news. It's all fake. Reporting and hyper-reporting on things that have no actual basis. They invent it. What we've seen is the following. We went from news being reported with a bias to news being editorialized with a bias. Now we've gone to fake news. That is news comedy. It's become like a Saturday Night Live sketch when Saturday Night Live was still funny. They actually interviewed Elmo, the children's puppet, about Mr. Trump's policies on CNN this past week. It's become a self-admitted joke. Where can you get true news? Where can you get actual news? Again, as we always say, we get it from the Word of God. All of these things taking place. Finally, in Great Britain, we see Prince Harry admitting, saying that nobody in the royal family wishes to be the British monarch anymore. That's quite a situation. It is quite a situation indeed. The monarchy has lost moral credibility under Prince Charles. It has certainly lost any semblance of Christian credibility under Prince Charles, who does not want to be defender of the faith, but just defender of faith. Doesn't matter if it's Islam, Hinduism, or whatever. As the custodian of the Duchy of Cornwall, he donated land for the construction of mosques. He's engaged in every kind of unchristian worship and sponsorship of it that one can imagine. The decline of the monarchy's prestige and credibility in Britain is a direct result of the decline of at least the pretense of Judeo-Christian identity that the crown once represented. Immorality among the British monarchy is not new. Corruption among the British monarchy is not new. We can go back to George III, Henry VIII. It was widespread. But they all at least gave the pretense of somehow being Christian. Now that that is taken out of the equation, what do we expect to be left of the monarchy? Pay attention. Because of the threat of the EU and the erosion and loss of British sovereignty, the monarchy became important. Now, with Brexit, the monarchy is less important. You do not require the monarchy as an icon of British independence or sovereignty anymore. It is in a precarious state indeed. So we look at these events this week in prophecy. Across the globe, we see it in India, we see it in Gaza, we see it in Jerusalem, we see it in Washington, we see it in Whitehall in London. We see it everywhere. All the signs continue to mount up. No man knows the day or the hour. But one thing is clear. Jesus is coming soon. When Mosul falls, beware. This could lead to further tumultuous events in northern Syria and Iraq. At present, the Israeli government is holding the Assad regime responsible for everything that happens in Syria that affects Israel. And it is holding Hamas responsible for everything in Gaza that affects the security of Israel. But the situation is increasingly out of control. This week in prophecy, Yuli Edelstein expressed his concern to Russia and the United States that the emerging conflict over Syria and in Syria, with potential armed conflict between America and Russia, could affect Israel's security. The United States is now using F-22s that can more easily evade radar detection by Soviet military advisors and Soviet aircraft because of Putin's threat to take direct action against any Allied coalition planes crossing the Euphrates or crossing into Syria. Well, the Americans have responded by deploying F-22s instead of simply F-18s. I'm not saying that the Americans and Russians both have their finger on the trigger, but they both have their hands on the gun. And the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, has issued a statement to that effect. Again, it's always down to the Middle East. It's always down to Israel. It's always down to what the Word of God said it was going to be down to. That has been This Week in Prophecy. Thank you for listening. This is Jacob Prasch coming to you this week from Bulgaria. God bless. Speak to you, Lord willing, next week. Blessings, dear friends. Greetings in Jesus. This is your friend Jacob Prasch speaking to you at the moment from the UK. You know, so many of the questions we get in our Roku broadcast and on our Vimeo clips and on YouTube deal with subjects that we deal with much more extensively in our books. We can't, for the sake of brevity, go into the kind of depth in a TV broadcast we can actually go into in a book. But so many of the questions come from material that are expounded in the books on a much more broader scale that it's almost frustrating sometimes that we can't spend hours and hours answering the questions that are given to us. Obviously, practicality dictates that's not a possibility. The books are there. They're available. They're available in print through the Moriel catalog on the Moriel website, moriel.org. But in this day of Kindle and electronic books, they're also available through Amazon, and they're available through Kindle. The three books that would be the most referred to in the questions we receive are the three latest books. The first being The Dilemma of Laodicea. The Dilemma of Laodicea. It's an exposition of the seven churches in Revelation, culminating with the final two churches, Philadelphia and Laodicea particularly, setting the stage for the return of Jesus. The Dilemma of Laodicea would be the first. The second would be Shadows of the Beast. Shadows of the Beast. How the coming Antichrist, how his identity will be revealed to the faithful church. The rapture will not happen. Will not happen, absolutely not happen, until the faithful church knows who the ultimate beast of Revelation is. That is the Antichrist and also the false prophet. How the identity of the coming Antichrist will be revealed to the faithful church. Shadows of the Beast, the second book. And the final and latest one, Harpazo. Harpazo. What the scripture actually teaches about the rapture, the snatching away which takes place between the sixth and seventh seals in the book of Revelation. So these three books, The Dilemma of Laodicea, Shadows of the Beast, and Harpazo, all available in the Moriel catalog, all available through Amazon, and all easily available electronically by Kindle. Thank you so much, dear friends. God bless. May Jesus be with you.